Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options to Play video update. So, wrapping up the week, the way we normally wrap up the week, Options in Play on Friday. You know what that means, right? It's earnings on the radar. Um, this week, a little bit more, it's a little bit more mixed in terms of performance of like the earnings names. I guess the FOMC, maybe like Fed, kind of overshadowed some of like the scheduled names, and I'm thinking that could potentially uh, that could potentially be like a little bit of a headwind next week as well because we have the G20 next weekend, and I'm not really sure. It's the last week of June, right? Typically like this time of year is a little bit slower because it's like the calm before the storm when the next quarter earnings start up in July. So it's typically a little bit quieter, and I'm kind of wondering whether people are going to be really moving a lot of money around prior to the G20 meeting the following weekend. So going to have to be real particular with the names and like these setups because I figure it could be a little bit choppier, a little bit more like mixed action prior to the G20. So definitely going to have to focus just on some of like the best setups. So enough rambling, right? So Monday. Similar to last week, there's actually not a single company scheduled Monday, either before the open or after the close. All right, so Monday will be pretty quiet. Actually, really not any biotech news expected either. But the last two Mondays, we've had some pretty good M&A headlines. So that's something that could potentially be market moving. But if I knew what company was going to get bought out, that would be wonderful. So. Can't really anticipate those, but it could lead to some action. On the scheduled news front, though, nothing scheduled Monday. Tuesday before the open, Lennar, so a home builder. This could possibly be a mover, but to be honest, I haven't really traded the home builders in a long time. Just kind of like a group I've really just left alone for a long stretch. Um, there has been, occasionally a couple quarters where it's had a bigger move, but it's not consistent, and like the chart doesn't really look all that great one way or the other. So probably just gonna end up leaving this one alone. Tuesday after the close, you got a couple big names here. So first off, FedEx. So they're looking for about 9.5 points on FedEx, and coming off two pretty lousy quarters in a row. So the December quarter was a very very sharp gap down, and then the March quarter was also a gap down as well, but obviously a lot less in order of magnitude. And then basically like a week and a half later, it had recovered all of its losses. So it's gotten hit sharply. Throughout May, it got hit sharply, and then actually the bottom ended up being the day that there was a headline about Huawei investigating what FedEx was doing with like the shipping, so on and so forth, right? And that put it basically right down to this 150. So it's bounced off that 150, but still closer to the low end of its range versus the high. Coming off two weak quarters in a row, right? So it's got fundamental it's got fundamental bearish momentum. It's got price wise. It's got technical bearish momentum, and it's got some like just like political headlines too. So it seems like this is probably set up more for like a downside bet. At 9.5 points, not too bad. Thinking maybe do something like speculative. Look for numbers are weak and the stock starts to sink. Maybe you get like a move down into like the low 150s to retest this really big area down here. So that's what I'm thinking on FedEx. Micron's another big name. That's Tuesday after the close as well. So about 280, 275, 280 in that range. So the memory chip names have been some of the weakest of like the semis, and Micron really hasn't had much of a bounce in June, right? Like so the chips bounced, but Micron hasn't, and it's in a reasonably tight flag underneath 35. Um, you know, It did have about a four, actually it was a little bit over 4 point move in March. So at 280, 275, 280 in that range, like the options aren't priced too bad. Um, but overall the action's been real tough in semis. There hasn't been a lot of great moves on quarterly reports, and I feel like this is kind of like technicals are kind of indicating lower. The last couple quarters, like the guidance has been kind of weak. A lot of the chip stocks had weaker guidance this quarter. So, you know, I, I feel like there's a lot of mixed signals, and I'm thinking I'll probably end up leaving this alone. But maybe like look at like a sympathy idea, a sympathy trade like an STX, right, or Western Digital, just because those are kind of similar charts, and the options should be even less expensive implied volatility wise, right, because they're not reporting. And STX actually is interesting because on Micron's report back in March, so that was here. No, excuse me, it was here. So on Micron's report back in March, it actually moved greater than 5 points. So options should be priced a little bit under Micron, and it actually ended up having a point-wise a larger move than Micron last quarter. So that might be a way to play Micron as like a sympathy trade on like STX or Western Digital. All right, Wednesday before the open, General Mills, so consumer staple. 3.5 points is what's expected, but those are monthly options, so a lot of time value in those. Staples have been strong, right? General Mills coming off a solid quarter, which we were involved with back in March. Big reversal, so it got hit on those Mexico tariff headlines. It's recovered all of that, and it's got some overhead momentum. It's got some room if it keeps momentum strong overhead here. So um, high 50s could be possible if the numbers look good. So I'm thinking leaning more positive after last quarter and the overall price action in the staples. Um, but because their monthly contracts are a little bit more on the high side, so would have to get risk down a bit. So maybe like spreads, something to like get risk down, just because you're paying for a lot of time value on this one. All right. Also Wednesday morning, Blackberry. So 80 cents is what's priced in, and this used to be a go-to name for me around earnings just because it was such a consistent mover. But I guess I kind of lost interest in it a little bit recently just because like the price action's been real lousy. I will say this: it did move about $1.40 last quarter, so last time I reported, and price wise, it's kind of in like a pretty similar spot. So it moved $1.40 last quarter. Almost what it's within like 25 cents of where it closed that quarter. It's only priced in at 80 cents this time around. So I don't know. Might not do anything with it, but could look maybe like a straddle could be an interesting idea, right? Or a strangle, some sort of volatility strategy. If it's a name you like, it did have a greater than it had a greater than a dollar, 35, 40 move last quarter. It's only priced in at 80, so maybe there's some potential there. But I guess the overall price action for the last like year and a half has just been, it's kind of got me, away from the name just because it really wasn't consistent. So that's why I'm like, less, I guess, a little bit less interested this time around. All right, Wednesday after the close, no major names scheduled. KBH, another home builder, all right? But kind of going along the same lines as Lennar. Haven't really traded this group in a while, and like price wise, technically, they don't really seem all that compelling here. So probably not gonna mess around with them. All right, Thursday morning, couple, at least one big name. So we have Walgreens. So this one was great last quarter. Um, that right at the beginning of April, just fantastic move. Had that earnings combo trade set up going in, and just a monster move. Almost moved 3 times what they were expecting. So this time around, they're pricing in 3 points, and you know that's actually it doesn't seem too bad, right? Because I wouldn't be expecting a move of that magnitude, but at the same time, it's been kind of in like a sideways consolidation, right? And earnings obviously a pretty significant catalyst. So it moved about 9 to 10 last quarter. So even if it doesn't come anywhere near that, maybe if it moves like half, like 5, right? So that would basically put it up at the top of the gap, or potentially down. That would it would be about 4 points to get down and retest the low from late May. So 4 to 5 points either way. It's only priced in 3. So I'm thinking some sort of strangle probably on Walgreens, especially after the way it moved last quarter. Also, Thursday morning, you have Conagra, CAG, and McKesson. So CAG's, well, first of all, CAG's pricing in about 2.25, and McKesson's pricing in about 8. And both of those are monthly contracts. So my thinking is, because consumer staples, a lot of these names trade together. General Mills, so GIS, that might set the tone earlier in the week. And I would expect some sort of reaction out of these two, MKC and CAG, to the General Mills numbers. So going to wait and see what they look like after General Mills reports. And then maybe if they have like a big reaction to General Mills, we could maybe do something like go the other way, or maybe if they don't react at all, then maybe set up a trade also. So I'm gonna wait. Those two are gonna be kind of like wait and see. Thursday after the close, another big name, Nike. So 475 is about what's expected on this one. So it moved about 6 last quarter, and it knew and just under 7 back into, so just under 7 here, and about 6 in March. So 475, it's moved well over that the last 2 quarters. So volatility has definitely been more elevated on this recently. With Nike right now, though, there just seems to be a lot of mixed signals, right? So obviously, the China tariffs are going to have a pretty significant impact on Nike. A lot of like the trade headlines impact Nike. On the retail front, retail has been mixed. Definitely mixed, but athletic names have been a little bit better, right? So like Under Armour, Lulu. So these names in particular have been a little bit better. So I feel like a lot of mixed signals, and it could potentially be a little bit more choppy of a quarter, right? But I feel like kind of leaning bullish just because Lulu's been good, Under Armour has been good, and maybe expectations are low enough, right? Like, after the stock got hit in May on a lot of like the trade escalation, right? Trade tensions. Maybe expectations have come down low enough where, like an inline or a slight beat would be, more positive, especially with like Lulu and Under Armour performing pretty well. So maybe look at like a calendar spread though, or longer dated spread, something to kind of like smooth out like the higher near-term implied volatility, just because it might not see like a huge run right back to the high. So maybe something to kind of like lower near-term implied volatility or lower near-term risk in favor of like a slightly longer-term position. Okay, and last but not least, Friday before the open, Constellation. So 11.5 is what's expected on this guy. So crushed back in January, right? And then rebounded. The decent print back in April. So one bad, one good, and it's kind of like back down into. Well, it's certainly not as low as it was back in after January, but kind of back into like the 170, 180 range where it spent a lot of time this year. So momentum was pretty strong on this up until like the trade tariffs headlines started to cross, right, and then just like completely fell off a cliff, and it bounced, and now it's rolling over again. Staples and alcohol names, right? So like Diageo, it's another name. Like they've been performing very, very well. And Constellation moved 13 last quarter, so kind of like not entertaining like this January print, but just focusing on April. It moved about 13 last quarter, so 11.5. Options are a little bit more on the high end, but I feel like I'd be leaning more bullish just because last quarter was solid. Some peers have been acting really solid, and there was some pretty good momentum just up until like all of like those tariff headlines hit. So thinking, some sort of bullish strategy, maybe like a spread, targeting like maybe a more modest move up into like the high 190s, 200 area. That's what I'm thinking on STZ. All right. So definitely some big names next week. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out with like the G20 kind of looming next weekend, and expect a lot of headlines on that front. And then each day leading up to it, I could potentially see some sort of headline crossing about negotiations are going well, negotiations are going poorly, so on and so forth. So definitely got to be on your toes, and going to have to react a little bit quicker because there could be some really like kind of like sharp, volatile action. But wrapping up June with should be an entertaining week, and that's really all you can hope for because before you know it, earnings season is going to start. All right, so have a fantastic weekend, and I will talk to you guys all on Monday.